Hello, good evening, everyone. Yat al ine shiket ado shedine shia Tatiana Benali inishya tohto nasha nanis ajitachini nishle nashashedine bashichin kitachini dashiche ado bitani dashnale. My name is Tatiana Benali. I am from Sebita on the Navajo Nation. I am the Zuni clan of Tachini and born for the Tewa Bear Clan. I currently reside in Lenapehoking, and I'm here with the American Indian Community House, though I'm calling in from Chapel Hill in North Carolina, Lumbee territory at the moment. Thank you all so much for joining us. This series is hosted by the American Indian Community House to provide an intentional online space to collectively explore and discuss resources, information regarding Indigenous issues and conflicts that directly affect us today. Through shared concern and efforts, we will discuss actions, solutions, and the many different ways we can contribute toward the movement and change making. You can check out the H Instagram, Facebook, or sign up with the newsletter from the H website to keep up to date on the upcoming events. There is programming on wild variety support, elder storytelling, makers labs, at-home fitness classes, Native Theater Thursdays, and other great events that are virtual. I'm so happy to have you all here. Our past SJS focused on Native-led movements happening in Mashpee, Shinnecock, Wet'suwet'en, Southwestern tribal territories, Lenape tribes, and even we're revisiting Lakota territory right now with this session. Throughout these installments, we're continuously working on our collective understanding of how to garner intertribal solidarity by having these conversations, flesh out our definitions of self-determination, settler colonialism, and just share resources with each other. Some updates for people attending this series: we will be moving this event to every other week, so just keep that in mind. We are going to spend a little bit more time working on the HSJS handbook, so we're compiling all of the resources together and creating, something tangible that you guys can use and reference to for information regarding these different topics. So just keep an eye out for that. Tonight, we will be learning about the history of the Black Hills Six Grandfathers in honor of the work our relatives in Lakota territory are doing to bring justice to the desecration of the sacred site. We will be joined by panelists who will be talking about some of the history and lead up to what's happening on the ground today. There, we will also be sharing resources on where to donate and take initiative. Additionally, we will also be talking about more generally, protecting sacred sites and what that means to us as Indigenous people, as we have seen, developing momentum in Kumeyaay territory, like within the past few days. One of our panelists will actually not be able to join us today, but we're going to be playing that by ear. But I guess we'll just move into our programming. I have a video. One of the bigger platforms that has been a voice on this matter is the Indian Collective. And Democracy Now! From Lenapehoking was able to grab an interview with one of the main organizers of Indian Collective. So I'm going to go ahead and show a video. And I'm just going to go ahead and hook that up and get started on that.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. as the coronavirus pandemic intensifies in the United States, with a record 52,000 new cases in just 24 hours, President Trump plans to hold an Independence Day celebration Friday at Mount Rushmore in South Dakota, with a fighter jet flyover and fireworks, which are banned in the area due to extreme forest fire potential. Some 7,500 people are expected. And South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, a staunch Trump ally, says people will not be required to wear a mask or to remain 6 feet apart.
We'll be giving out free face masks if they choose to wear one, but we won't be social distancing.
Trump's rally comes amidst a national debate on how to deal with statues and symbols that enshrine systemic racism. Mount Rushmore itself is named after a gold rush lawyer and speculator. The monument features the sculpted heads of 4 U.S. presidents, Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt, blasted out of the ancient granite between 1927 and 1941 by 400 workers, directed by sculptor Gutzon Borglum. Earlier, he was recruited by the Daughters of the Confederacy to carve the huge stone mountain memorial to Confederate leaders in Georgia. Borglum was close to the Ku Klux Klan and was likely a member. Mount Rushmore in the region, now known as the Black Hills, which is the sacred center of the Lakota people's universe and the president of the Oglala Sioux tribe, has ordered Trump to cancel Friday's event. Julian Bearrunner told The Guardian, quote, "The lands on which that mountain is carved and the lands he's about to visit belong to the Great Sioux Nation under a treaty signed in 1851 and the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. And I have to tell him he doesn't have permission from its original sovereign owners to enter the territory at this time," he said. The government acknowledged tribal sovereignty over the Black Hills in 2 separate treaties and committed the land, quote, "for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupancy of the Sioux." But gold was discovered there in the 1870s, and the Army drove the indigenous people out. Decades of armed indigenous resistance to the waves of settler colonists that followed ended with the Army's brutal massacre of Lakota women, children, and the elderly at Wounded Knee on December 29, 1890. All of this comes as Indian country has been particularly hard hit by the coronavirus pandemic. Well, for more, we're going to Rapid City, South Dakota, not far from the Black Hills, where we're joined by Nick Tilson, president and CEO of the NDN Collective, a national organization dedicated to building indigenous power. He's a citizen of the Oglala Lakota Nation on Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Nick, it's great to have you back with us. Can you describe the organizing that's going on around President Trump's Friday, July 3rd, visit and Independence Day celebration at Mount Rushmore, and why you're protesting?
Absolutely. Great to be back on here, Amy. The organizing that's going on is about building, a collective resistance, because there's this narrative being pushed, by the president and by the governor to celebrate this falsehood of democracy that has not ever worked for us as Indigenous people. And it's also ignoring this deep history of white supremacy and oppression towards Indigenous people. So we're actively organizing young and old Indigenous people and our allies, and bringing people together around building power and in organizing in the community to counter that narrative, and to counter the narrative that this is the shrine of democracy, when we really feel like it's the shrine of hypocrisy.
You said to the New York Times, wherever you go to connect to God, that's what the Black Hills are to the Lakota. Talk about the significance of Mount Rushmore, designed by a sculptor with links to, and maybe was a member of the KKK. Talk about what these 4 carvings of the heads of 4 presidents means.
Yeah, I mean, the Black Hills, or the Chesapa in our language, is the place that we connect to Creator. It's the place where we will pick our medicines. Our people have been traveling there for thousands of years and following the actual star constellations to go to our sacred sites at different times. And so this place is very, very sacred to our people. And so the act of one stealing our land and then carving the faces of 4 white men who were colonizers, who committed genocide against indigenous people, is an egregious act of violence. And then furthermore, for it to be celebrated as this shrine of democracy. Some people don't know. I mean, people talk about Abraham Lincoln as being one of the better presidents in the history of the country. Well, people don't realize that on one end, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and then he also ordered the largest mass hanging in the history of the United States when he ordered the hanging of 38 Dakota people after the uprising in Dakota Territory in southern Minnesota. And so these parts of this history are the truth and the reality. And so this is an act of violence and aggression against us. And it's also pushing this falsehood narrative about American democracy, when we actually really should be uplifting the truths of what happened throughout history and how those truths are directly connected to the disparities that exist today in society amongst Indigenous people.
Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, said masks will not be required, though they'll be given out, and there will be no social distancing. Thousands and thousands of people are expected to crowd in. This, of course, follows the Tulsa event, this catastrophe for President Trump, where he said something like 1 million people might be turning out and something like 6,000 did inside. And now we have the images of his campaign staff removing social distancing stickers inside the arena. And now we know that most of the campaign staff had to self-quarantine afterwards. So moving from Tulsa, where he had to move his event from Juneteenth to the 20th because of outcry, on the 99th anniversary month of one of the worst massacres of African Americans in U.S. history, to Mount Rushmore. And President Trump just this week calling for the protection of Confederate soldiers and the images of Black Lives Matter, symbols being symbols of hate. Your thoughts of what he is trying to convey, and especially now with this fireworks display, when fireworks are banned in the region because of forest fire potential?
Yeah, I mean, it's astonishing to me, but I guess in some ways it's not what we've seen, pushing this falsehood narrative and trying to wrestle up his base and pretending that rural America, right, it backs Trump when rural America doesn't back Trump. And so I think, I think that this makes it actually like a very dangerous situation when he's pushing these narratives of white supremacy, and he's digging in deeper and deeper, and he's using these symbols of grave injustice and couching them as part of the great American story, and using it as an opportunity to try to catalyze his campaign forward.
And
when in reality,
your thoughts, Nick, on Trump tweeting, "I will veto the defense authorization bill if the Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren, of all people, amendment, which will lead to the renaming plus other bad things of Fort Bragg, Fort Robert E. Lee, and many other military bases from which we won 2 world wars, is in the bill." Him referring to her once again as Pocahontas, and then talking about preserving the names of these bases named after Confederate leaders.
I mean, it's the reality that we have a white supremacist and a racist who's the president of the United States currently, and that's why when we when we mobilize and organize against these narratives, we have to realize that we're mobilizing and organizing for the betterment of our nation, not just resisting a racist president, but that we actually are pivoting to actually building power, because we have to build a country that we all collectively believe in and are fighting for. And so it's so important for us to come out, not just in resistance of the president, but actually in the protection for the future that we're all trying to build together in this nation.
When you talk about protection, in early May, leaders of the Oglala and Cheyenne River Sioux refused a request from South Dakota's Republican Governor Noem, a close ally of Trump, to remove checkpoints leading to their reservation that they say help to protect the tribe from the coronavirus, of course, and especially in Navajo Nation and New Mexico, a hot spot for coronavirus. This showdown that has happened around coronavirus, and now President Trump and his ally, Governor Noem, saying there will be no social distancing.
Yeah, I mean, the tribes have been doing a great job in this region for protecting our borders and using tribal sovereignty to protect our community and our people. And we have seen, you know, the act of aggression by Governor Kristi Noem to try to limit tribal sovereignty and try to prohibit tribes' ability to protect their own community when there's already legal precedent in place that tribes already have tribal sovereignty to control who comes, you know, who comes and leaves in their reservation, and we already have tribal sovereignty for the purpose of protecting our communities and our people. And so it's egregious that there's these aggressive attempts and attacks on tribal sovereignty for the sole purpose of pushing a false narrative that a global pandemic is not happening. And so we continue to dig in here, and our tribal leaders of Oglala Sioux Tribe and the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe continue to step up in great leadership to continue to protect our communities and our people against against these false narratives and against the global pandemic.
Nick Tilson, we've heard about white supremacist militias and the Black Hills, a couple dozen of these militias. We've heard about the massive Klan march in the 1920s in this area of South Dakota. One of the largest chapters of the Klan existed. If you can talk about that background and how you're organizing for tomorrow.
Yeah, so I mean, the history of white supremacist groups in this region is well known, and so has this been a hotbed for indigenous resistance. And so there's been, you know, extremes here, and so, you know, we will continue to organize in March. We will do so without any fear, but with caution. And so, you know, nowadays everybody, you know, tries to make threats to limit, to try to prevent people from organizing and protesting. But in our particular situation, we have been fighting for our land for thousands of years, and we intend to continue to fight for our land without any, regardless of threats and regardless of white supremacist groups that are in the region, because we believe in the power of the Creator and the power that exists amongst the elders and the young people to help to protect our communities.
What do you want to see happen with Mount Rushmore, Nick?
Long term, we want to see Mount Rushmore closed as a national monument, and the decision-making power of what to do with it needs to be transferred back to the Oglala, to the Lakota people of the region.
And finally, your own family's remarkable history, going back to your great-grandmother, Merida LeSueur, the great writer.
Yeah, our family has been organizing for generations, you know, on both sides of my family, and really even here in the Black Hills in 1980, my father and mother and many other leaders came together to organize the Black Hills Survival Gathering in this region, which was the convergence of a movement, of the environmental movement and of the anti-nuclear movement, and there's still the roots of that organizing that continues to happen here. So it's I'm definitely honored to be a part of a family that has had generational organizing taking place.
Nick Tilson, thanks so much for being with us. President and CEO of the NDN Collective, dedicated to building Indigenous power, citizen of the Oglala Lakota Nation on Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, one of the organizers of the protest at President Trump's Independence Day celebration at Mount Rushmore on July 3rd. Before we go to break, coming up, we're going to be talking about Vice President, former Vice President, presidential candidate Joe Biden. And then we'll talk about what happened to Vanessa Guillen. Stay with us.
All right, so that was aired on July 2nd. So we obviously know that a lot has happened since then, and we have Candy Brings Plenty on the call with us today. So I'm going to give you some time to introduce yourself and your background, Candy.
Hey, Matakiapi. Leampe tukile, iyo ha chante washte nape chuziapi. Imachiapi chante makielabi. Imachiapi wakia tuampi iyo yampapi. Mi washichi chazekile, Candy Brings Plenty. I would like to greet each and every one of you with a handshake from my heart. I'm here in the Black Hills in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I am representing myself for all the different spectrum of work that I do. I'm also the Indigenous Justice Organizer for the ACLU South Dakota, and I'm also the Executive Director for the Two-Spirit Nation. So everything that I do, I walk with this duality of both my queer, Indigenous, non-binary Two-Spirit identity, and as an Oglala Lakota Sioux frontline Indigenous activist. So, I just always want to create that space and that visibility for the Two-Spirit walk that I lead, because in all the work that I do, I continue to try to advocate for that. And, over each of the different types of front lines that we've been faced with in the past few years, fighting for our voices to be seen and heard, protecting the water, protecting the sacred, honoring the treaties, and continuously bringing visibility to the injustice across Turtle Island, to ourselves as Indigenous people and our relatives across this epic struggle of continuing to fight, continuing to pursue our civil liberties, even, just our First Amendment, to be able to speak and to protest and to be honored the way any other non-Indigenous peaceful protest get to be seen. And that is exactly the role that I stood during the protest up at Mount Rushmore against number 45. I was there as a legal observer, but my first and foremost, I was there as a mama bear, because I have two teenagers who are stepping up, who are embracing and learning this walk of life as young Indigenous warriors, and what that means to empower their ancestral DNA that we all were born with, because we were born into this oppressive colonial violence that we continue to empower ourselves to reflect and deflect for our future generations.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. And for those who were able to tune into our SJS, maybe like 5 sessions ago, Candy joined us then as well to give us the rundown on the checkpoints that were mentioned in the video as well. But we also had a social justice series focusing on the checkpoints in Lakota territory. And I think the Standing Rock, the Cheyenne River Sioux tribes are doing a great job of holding people accountable and also enforcing their tribal sovereignty, their self-determination to create a healthy society for all of their relatives within that area. So I'm so thankful to have you back. And yeah, a lot has happened. And now that I'm learning a lot more about that collectively with you all, it's refreshing to hear the history, brought up of like the protests that happened in Lakota territory in like the 60s, the 70s, the 80s surrounding the Black Hills. And it's, the fight is continuing today, and I'm sure it won't stop, now, especially with all that's going on. But yeah, so I guess I just wanted to have you talk a little bit more about like your experience on the ground, some of the demands that you all have, and maybe next steps that you yourself as just a community member, as well as somebody, you know, that's a part of probably, you know, you're a part of a bunch of organizations, but what those organizations feel are the next steps for of action, I guess.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So, you know, as of the experience on Friday, I was so excited to see so many young people who were out there, especially young women and young two-spirits stepping up. And they also were part of the initial organizing. They put out the actual Facebook protest rally, and we wanted to support them. All the different Indigenous organizers and Frontline, Standing Rock, seasoned water protectors, we knew that this was a stance that they needed to make and that we needed to support. And so my role was also to elevate that for them and to see how our next generation definitely is ready and willing and wanting to exercise their civil liberties and to be seen and heard as protectors. But one thing we did notice is we definitely need to start initiating trainings and what that looks like. We need to start creating visibility in whatever type of solidarity it is that we want to do on the ground as Indigenous voices. Because, you know, even during, you know, all the Black Lives Matters protests that were going on, we knew that it was about Black and Indigenous solidarity, definitely. Because one of the things that I continue to say across any of my platforms is that when I'm talking to any of the non-Native entities who are our allies, who, you know, the white privileged folks who want to be a part of our movement, I tell them, you know, to be a good ally means that you're gonna acknowledge and recognize that your privilege was built on the shoulders of my ancestors, built on stolen lands by stolen people. And so for our liberation to continue moving forward is absolutely that foundation of Black and Brown liberation and solidarity. So I wanted to see during that time, you know, a lot more of our Indigenous youth prepared for what that looked like. And I know a lot of us weren't prepared for what that looked like. And oftentimes when we do these types of frontline actions, it is authentic. It is very incorporated in our spiritual intention to reclaim who we are, to reclaim our identities, and to reclaim our land back. And that is part of, you know, that hashtag that came along with this intention. And that was definitely part of the demands, is the closing of Mount Rushmore as a national monument, and to return the land back to the Lakota people whose land it is. And it is, you know, their decision and what to do and moving forward, not the folks who are within the scope of, you know, white privilege and political power who are in positions of power that impact those most impacted. You know, so we definitely, you know, a huge demand is, you know, ending white supremacy and systemic racism, but that in itself is something that we have to tackle and bring to the surface across all of the intentions of organizing and creating change. Because I know that working in the scope of a colonial lens of organizing is completely different than what it looks like for Indigenous people to organize. And that was part of why I chose to, you know, very last minute, I wasn't there in my role as an ACLU Indigenous Justice organizer. Like I said, I was there to support my two teenagers. I wanted them to get that experience and to support them and let them lead the way, and also to step in as a mentor to all of these young Two-Spirits and young women who asked me if I could be there to support their voice. And so I did create a post because there was a lot of photos that weren't put out into the mainstream media about these young women who made the stand, who called to action everyone who showed up. And that's the stories that we need to tell, and that needs to be seen, because mainstream media always paints the picture and narrates the voice of how they want Indigenous frontliners to be seen. And a lot of times, you know, that's where I was so excited to hear people who were on the front lines, who were at the protest stating, you're violating my civil rights, you know, and they're talking about, this is my First Amendment constitutional right, and, you know, my freedom of speech. And I kept hearing that on repeat from different people. And it was amazing, because there was a time when we knew that the front line, or the militarized officers were moving forward. And so I was able to do a brief know your rights training right there on the ground to all the folks who were getting ready to be arrested. And so, you know, I know that because I was at Standing Rock, and the type of action that we seen up at Mount Rushmore, we went through that on a daily. And there was so many people who it was their first time, but they were ready to put their bodies on the line. And we had allies who wanted to be there and who were there, but they also were aware of their privilege and they didn't know how to use it. So I feel like we still have so much more organizing to do. And I really want to encourage folks with white privilege to utilize that, because that is a huge entity that doesn't cost them anything except for who they really are and their integrity.
Awesome. It's great to hear those updates. And you mentioned that, well, and also if you tuned in on Facebook Live, wherever you're at, to the people that are tuning in, we did see like a lot of people get arrested. Is there only one fund for donating, or do you know like the status on if there's other like donation places or anything like that?
Okay, it's solely with bhlegalfund.org. And
Okay.
I have seen a few others out there, and I think their intention was to fundraise and donate it to the Black BH, and the BH stands for Black Hills, but it's BH Legal Fund, all one word, lowercase, .org. And this is also something that, you know, the Trumpsters were trying to make an obstruction to the legal fund. If you do bhlegalfund.com, it's going to reroute you directly to Trump's campaign.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. So please do
scary.
.org. So a lot of people had thought that the Bell Fund had gotten hacked, but it didn't. It's .org.
Oh my gosh. I had no idea. That's good to know. That's really interesting. I had no idea. Yeah, so if you go to the site here, BH Legal Fund, and that was slightly organized by an Indian collective too, correct?
Yes, they're the fiscal sponsor.
Okay.
And
yeah,
also
so
all the information on there, and the demands and the mission and the intent.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I just like pulled it up just now. It reads, on July 3rd, 2020, Indigenous peoples and our allies were arrested in the process of defending our sacred lands in the Black Hills. Acts of courage and civil disobedience resulted in arrests and criminal charges. We were protesting the desecration of sacred lands that were stolen from our people. Mount Rushmore was stolen from the Lakota people in our treaties and human rights violated. This stolen land was taken from us, and then the faces of our former U.S. presidents were carved into the mountain. These U.S. presidents were colonizers that committed acts of genocide against Indigenous and BIPOC people throughout Turtle Island. Mount Rushmore was carved by Borglum, a member of the Ku Klux Klan. As it stands today, Mount Rushmore is a national symbol of white supremacy and systemic racism. As a group of Indigenous people and our allies, we made a stand against Donald Trump, the President of the United States, who made a decision to come to Oshodi Shakowin territory without the free, prior, and informed consent of the tribal nations of the region. The president was attempting a comeback tour of rural America, and he wanted to put on a show of fireworks at Mount Rushmore as part of the 4th of July. So I just wanted to read that because I thought it was really well written and kind of contextualizes everything. But yeah, I think the last time we had you, you were talking about the checkpoints, and it just seems like this is just, you know, like it's building momentum with Kristi Noem kind of just like in the back end of everything. Do you know if there are more updates on like the checkpoints? I know Trump was eventually involved with that, so it's all like coming together in a weird way.
Well, currently the last that he had put out into public was he was threatening to pull federal funding from the tribes, specifically from the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. And the other tribe is my tribe, the Oglala Sioux tribe. But the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe has put they are suing. They have an active case at the moment right now. Okay,
that's good to know. And for people that don't know, in some Lakota territories, they have put up checkpoints to test for COVID-19 to ensure like the safety of, you know, their nations and their community well-being. And the governor of South Dakota made it, you know, their business to remove those checkpoints. But obviously we have like, you know, we have enough to back up what we're doing, and we have the right to protect our people. So, and this case is kind of just like going onwards since then. And that was maybe what, like a month ago?
Yes, and the intent that is unspoken, and being a water protector and knowing that we are facing the construction of the KXL pipeline. That KXL pipeline, you know, I finally drove out there myself. It is very visual. It is right next to the border of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. And because of these checkpoints, they're obstructing the highways for these man camps to be built, for this construction of this pipeline to have public access. And so we are very aware that when it comes down to it, it is about the construction of the KXL pipeline. It is about building these man camps for the KXL construction. So the intent to impact our tribal sovereignty by the demand of removing our checkpoints is also impeding on our Indigenous sovereignty and our ability to protect our sovereign nations.
Exactly. And even like the well-being of like the future well-being of your communities, because man camps often bring a lot of dangers with them. There's a lot of connection there with missing, murdered Indigenous relatives as well. So it's overall just a really dangerous situation for tribal communities to have a pipeline or any kind of resource extraction happening on or near a tribal land. So it's 6:45 right now, and according to our agenda, right now we're going to open it up into a Q&A and open discussion. So if people have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. And Candy, if you would like to mention anything else or elaborate more on anything, feel free to take this time to do that as well.
Okay. I just wanted to thank the folks who did show up. There was so many elders, and there was so many youth, and we've seen the really strong impact of how the experience from those who stepped up from Standing Rock helped this action be very organized. And it had a very a very peaceful intent, and it definitely was the Trump supporters on the other side of the militarized officers who were the antagonists, who continued to just, you know, there was a very vocal white cis male who attacked a young Indigenous woman. He spit on her and he pushed her down, and it was witnessed and it was recorded. And, you know, we had to push because there was the militarized officers, there was the National Guard, and there was the sheriffs, and there was the police department from Pennington County. And they were all lined up and they were all witnessing. And we had to really push them to see that there was a violation, that there was a young woman who was being physically attacked, who, you know, and that was part of our constitutional rights, is having the protection from the police officers to keep us safe while we are expressing and exercising our civil liberties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's so relevant with, you know, all of the discussions that we're having, you know, now with the Black Lives Matter movement. So I think that's something to think about, especially if you're going out and organizing, is how, you know, people don't realize that you have to be very aware of, you know, you have to know like how to navigate all of the boundaries that are there, even though you don't want to. But yeah, I think that's definitely something that has been on my mind as well. Thinking about like how those intersect, especially as we move forward within organizing. And I think that's like a lot of discussions that organizations in Lenapehoking are having, you know. But yeah, I think that's super interesting. Another thing, I was just going to like, I guess like generally talk about sacred sites. As we all watched in the video, you know, this isn't only happening, you know, in one place. It's happening to Indigenous people, you know, all over Turtle Island. We're defending the Oak Flats, Bears Ears, and it's all very much tied together with like Candy brought up, land back and protecting the sacred sites. A lot of people say what happens to our land happens to our bodies, and you know, our land is not for sale for that reason. And one of the things I thought was interesting as well with what's happening on Lakota territory is the fact that, yeah, like there was a case against Cheyenne Sioux versus the USA, and they were trying to buy back. There's this long history with the Black Hills and, you know, buying it, giving it back, desecrating it, and then trying to buy it again. So I'm just, if people have the time to go through that history, we had another panelist that was going to be joining us today, and kind of going through that, but they weren't able to join us. But I think that's worth looking into, is looking through the history of the Black Hills and, you know, where it was at certain points in time, and, you know, the stance of the people living there has always been the same, you'll notice. And yeah, I'm so proud, like, to see, like, Candy, like, on my news feed on Facebook, you know, throwing down, as well as, like, other familiar faces. But yeah, I don't know. Oh, okay. I do see that somebody posted a question. It says, last I heard, only Nick was still in police custody. Do we know if he's been released yet?
Well, what had happened was there was 15 folks that we knew of, and I know there's about because they said there was 20 arrested total on that day, but the other 5 were, not part of our action, but they did get arrested during that time in Keystone or on the Hill or for other reasons. But the 15 who were part of our group, several of them got booked and released and bonded out immediately, one of them being my niece. And the other ones, there was 3 of the males who weren't released. They were held overnight, and 2 of them were released the next day, but they kept Nick over the weekend, and he had court yesterday morning. And yesterday morning, they did give him a bond, and he has his preliminary court hearings coming up. So that's the next step. And we know it's going to be a process, because we're also aware of Kristi Noem. She pushed a bill during the legislative session in which I did a lot of leading for in regards to Indigenous justice with the ACLU. It was the riot boosting bill, or House Bill 1117. It was a riot boosting bill in regards to inciting riots. And we know that the charges were and are just trying to build a case. But, we know continuously in each of our movements, they continue to single out an individual leader. And so we feel like that is exactly what's happening. And on the flip side of that, this is where I continuously come from, because I feel like reaching and grasping the Constitution and our constitutional rights is a tool to equip ourselves when we're in these types of situations, because it's something that is used against us. But honoring the treaties in itself and working to get our land back is a constitutional violation by the US government, because it is the supreme law of the land. It's part of the Constitution. It is Article 6, Section 2.
Thank you for elaborating on that. We also have another question: best way to use my white privilege if I cannot physically protest? Do you have a stance on that, Candy?
If you can't physically protest, like I was saying, I like to use my story with Jane Fonda, and how when we're at Standing Rock and she asked me the same question, I had to say the same thing that I said previously. First, to recognize her white privilege and her success was built on the shoulders of my ancestors. So as a good white ally, you're going to allow an Indigenous voice to be seen and heard by standing on the shoulders of your white privilege. So whatever that looks like to that person, whether it's, donating money, or if it's using your platforms, or, I had a person call me the other day saying they had a van that they wanted to give away to an Indigenous person who was struggling to get to their appointments. And they had said they just beat cancer and they wanted to pass it forward. So I thought that was really amazing. And there's so many different ways each individual person can recognize what their privilege is and how to use that to amplify or create space for Indigenous voices to be seen and heard.
Thank you. It's such a great story. We have one last question, and I think I can help you answer that. Can I ask about the Standing Rock protesters who are in jail? With those pipelines being stopped, does this overturn those sentences? And I think the short answer is no, right?
Yeah, and I was feeling really bad about that too, because yesterday we were all celebrating, hearing all the different great news about the halting of the different pipelines across the United States, especially the Dakota Access Pipeline that we fought for at Standing Rock. But we know that there's still the whole litigation process, and that, during that time, as I was stating, in each movement, there's always those leaders who get singled out, and they get stacked with charges, so that often it's trying to show those of us who are vocal and willing to do the work that they're going to be made of examples out of. So I want to do what we can, but I understand from right now, that it's not something that goes hand in hand.
Awesome. Well, I think we're gonna start to wrap things up. Did you have any last words or projects that you would like to highlight?
Well, I was really sick these past few days, and today's the first day that I can really eat, and I still feel a little bit nauseous, but I recognize the feeling, and it was definitely the LRAD. That LRAD is a long range acoustic device. And it's definitely something that is utilized to impact people who are on the front lines. And for me, it reminds me that, and it's a term I've coined and I've been using, is that we also have to equip ourselves with our spiritual armor. And everything is about not just the physical protest, because there's the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual protection. So the prayers and all of the intention is just as important as wearing goggles or having any type of mask or face shield. So, and I'm so grateful to my mother. She, like I was saying too, everyone has a role when it comes to protecting the sacred. And that's something we did at the Two Spirit Nation camp. We made sure that those who were equipped mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that they were the strong points to go out onto the front lines. And we had folks who stayed behind, who were in prayer, folks who cooked because that is medicine and nourishment, and folks who are ready to receive those who came back because they, sometimes you're maced, or sometimes you need help getting the clothing on that you need or taking up. But I'm just, stating everyone has a role when it comes to protecting the sacred. And first and foremost, we're fighting not just for ourselves, but it's to protect the sacred so that we can pass it forward to our next generation. And if we're not taking care of our spirits, then the whole intention of our Wola Kota goes out of balance. So I just want to reiterate that there is a whole mental, emotional, physical that goes with protecting the sacred.
Thank you. And I think that's something that, Western education kind of doesn't really touch upon when we're, in school. But I think it's something when you're back home with your family, you definitely are able to learn about those different, pieces or those different tools that can help you. I guess we do have one more question, so this will be the last one. How is mask fund going? Do the elders still need masks?
Definitely, because we just went on, or the Oglala Sioux tribe just went on a 72-hour lockdown because we're at the height of our COVID-19 cases. And I know that folks continuously are asking for masks, and I know that for right now, that is like the first line defense that we can offer those who are most impacted on our reservations.
Thank you. Thank you, Candy, so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your knowledge. It's always a pleasure to have you on as a guest. I think a lot of the attendees would agree that your voice is medicine, and your experience as well. With that said, I would encourage everybody on the Zoom call to look up the bhlegalfund.org specifically and share it, read the information, and update yourselves. There's a lot of live streams out there for what went down on the grounds, and you can see exactly what that device was Candy was talking about. And I think as an act going forward, just keep yourself updated on the checkpoints and the cases, and continue to show solidarity with our relatives in Lakota territory as they continue to fight for tribal sovereignty and self-determination to protect their relatives and their community as a whole. And have a good night. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Tennis, can we unmute everybody so everybody can say if they want to say something?
Sure. Give me one sec, everybody.
Tennis, do we have other events this week?
We do. Yeah, maybe I'll just go over those real quick. We have Thursday, Fit Native is back. I'm teaching workout classes again at noon on Thursday. You can join via Zoom or watch on Facebook Live. And Thursday night, our play reading series, Native Theater Thursdays, is back. We're doing a play called Quantum by Tara Moses. And that is Thursday night at 8 p.m. These are all Eastern times. And Friday, our Two-Spirit Indigiqueer Bingo is back. It's super fun. We always have a guest host. That is at 7 o'clock. That's just on Zoom. It is not streamed on Facebook. And then Sunday at noon, we have our Elders Talking Circle, open to community members of all ages. And that's at noon. And then at 3 o'clock, we have our Facebook Live weekly updates, streamed on Facebook Live. And then the following week, we'll have on Wednesday, we'll have our Sacred Spaces, our new program, Traditional Knowledge and Teachings, on Wednesday at 5 p.m. So that's it so far. And everyone should be able to unmute. So if everyone wants to say good night or thank you or anything, go ahead.
Wopila Tonka, thank you everyone for having me back. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Tatiana.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.